Okay, so hi everyone. Welcome to kind of our first session, our first official session. And we're really excited. We have Sujith Sutharsan. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. And he is a criminal lawyer. I won't introduce him too much. I'll let him do that in just a minute. The session is being recorded. If you guys have any questions, anything you want to ask him or us, we do have a question and answer period at the end. You can write your questions in the chat throughout, and then we'll read them out and we'll ask him the questions at the very end. And you can also feel free to turn your mic on at the end if you want to ask your question that way. And yeah, so this is going to be a pretty interactive session. I hope you guys enjoy. And yeah, so Sujith, if you want to start introducing yourself.
Yes, so I guess technically my pronunciation of my name is Sujith. I've got used to all kinds of pronunciations, but I'm trying to correct everyone as we go along. So it's Sujith Sutharsan. I'm now almost 3 years called as a lawyer. I've been working basically on my own since call. I went to the University of Waterloo for undergrad, and then I went to Windsor for my law school. I'm currently practicing in criminal defense. I only practice in criminal defense, so if you guys have any other questions with respect to any other area, I probably know as much as you, which is unfortunate, but law school appears to be a long time ago. And I resort to all my other colleagues who are well more versed in those areas if I have any other questions or clients that come through. So I don't know if I can specifically answer any of those kind of questions, but if you guys want to talk about those things, I can of course point you guys in the right place, and I'm sure you can find someone.
Okay, perfect. And just to start off, if we could just know, what did you kind of study in your undergraduate program? I know that it doesn't really matter what you take for law school, but could you let us know what you majored in and kind of what courses really stood out to you during your undergrad?
Yeah, I took a Bachelor of Arts, Legal Studies and Business, particularly at Waterloo. Like you said, of course, not everyone realizes you don't have to take anything legal oriented. You could literally take any sort of bachelor degree and go into law school. I know people that came from science backgrounds, math backgrounds, engineering backgrounds, and we're all very successful in law school as well. Even I believe in our class there's one music major. So you don't really need something specific to go to law school. I guess I was like from grade 12, I was pretty much set, and you know what, I feel like I want to be a lawyer. So initially I was only applying to business programs, and I decided, you know what, like I want to be a lawyer. And in the back of my mind, I thought, okay, Bachelor of Arts seems a little easier than a BCom, and maybe I can do better. But little did I know the university is hard all around, and I suffered through first year, but I somehow figured my way out in the last few years.
And were there any courses during your undergrad that you think maybe helped you? Because I know that you said that you majored in legal studies. And within that, was there anything that would kind of help you with your decision to go to law school? Like, yes, I definitely want to go after taking courses like this, or you do definitely have an interest in law?
So I took primarily legal studies, which in Waterloo was basically a sociology course. So we got to study people, things like juvenile delinquency, prisons, policing, things of that nature. And personally, the more and more I got to learn about people is where I was convinced that I wanted to work with people. I knew that even when I go into law, I wanted to be someone that was more hands-on with clients, gets to meet clients, and things like that became important to me compared to the more transactional work that some lawyers are good at. So in that sense, I thought my undergrad was very helpful in sort of, confirming my interests in those areas, such as social justice and all of that, and also realizing that I enjoy working with people. I think that was the main lesson I took out of undergrad.
Okay, perfect. And did you apply to law school right after you graduated? Like, when did you take your LSAT? And could you let us know a little bit about how the process was for you in terms of studying for it? It's obviously like a really long process, and it's a pretty difficult test to take. So if you could let us know what that was like for you.
So I think this is why I was very happy that you guys are doing this event, because as an undergrad student, especially if you aren't with other people that are going through the law school process, it's quite easy to get lost. I think most of my friends were engineers and in the science background, like none of them are going to law school. I remember reaching out to someone that was actually a year younger than me who was going through law school, and we ended up bringing the LSAT together because, you know, it was nice to have someone to go through the process with. So a lot of people, well, if you're in pre-law, I guess you probably know that, you know, your grades, LSAT, extracurriculars, all those things matter. So my grades weren't good at all in my first year, and even my second year, my grades weren't good. So I decided that I'm going to focus on making sure I have good grades in my third and fourth year, and then take a year off. When I went to law school, I realized I wasn't the only one. There was a lot of people that came straight. There was a lot of people that took a year off, a lot of people that took 2 years off. And there was still quite a significant number of people that came into law school in their 30s and later on in life. So don't feel like you have to get to law school right after undergrad. What I personally did is I decided to take a year off, and I think it was a very important year for me, self-growth wise, and to apply for law school. So right after my undergrad, I decided to do a 5-week Kaplan course, try to cram to get the LSAT done. So I think I graduated in April. I finished my course in April. I was writing the exam for June. So I had about 5 weeks to study. And needless to say, I think it was too much, too fast, and I didn't do well in my first round. And the other thing that I didn't calculate for was my first time writing it. I wrote it at York. I think the LSATs are online now, but when we had to write it, it was in person. And when I was writing at York, I'm writing with 300 different people, and it was just, I wasn't comfortable. So then the second time around, I made sure I was writing it in Waterloo, and it was in a classroom that I'd already been in. I was very comfortable in that classroom. There was about 60 people in that room writing together, so it wasn't as intimidating. I also had more opportunity to study and you know, get my my logic games down, my reading comprehension down, like all those specific things. I had my strategy at a higher level where I was scoring higher in my practice tests. So then when I eventually did go to write it, I did almost like 6-7 points better in my second round. So I was like, that was my best score. And then after that, I decided to work, and I was working in the banking industry for about 8-9 months. And it was good in the sense that I was able to save up money for my first year of law school, but it was also, I realized I hated it. I was like, I'm ready to go to law school and end up doing what I actually want to do, because it was not for me. So I think that was my process in going into law school. I know one of the regret I have is I didn't make a lot of good professor contacts while I was in undergrad. I never went to, you know, teacher hours or professor hours and pick their brain at all, because for me, I was very intimidated by my professors. I didn't see them as a colleague. I saw them as a superior. So I never took the time to get to know them. When I went to law school, it sort of changed and got to know professors a little bit, but I would highly recommend getting to know them, especially because they do have to write you a reference letter when you're going to law school. And I remember what I had to do is I had to cold email the professor and be like, hey, like, I don't know if you remember me, but I was this tall brown guy in your class. Like, I did pretty well. Like, do you think you can write me a reference letter? So it was like, I didn't have a personal connection. And thankfully, he did write the reference letter. And when I was applying, the reference letters will be sealed by the professor and sent directly to ULSAS. So I didn't have to, like, I didn't get a chance to look at it. So it could have been a bad letter, but I'm assuming he wrote a good letter, because I did end up getting in. So I'm very thankful to those two professors who wrote me letters. So I would say, don't forget about the other parts of the application. Obviously, you know, LSAT, make sure you're comfortable, figure out your strategy for your LSAT, make sure you have your extracurriculars lined up, make sure you have your personal statement, take your time to go through it, take your time to, like, make sure for each university, it's specific to that university and what they offer you. And then also make sure you have your reference letters ready to go, because you don't want to be scrambling at the last second like I did.
Mm-hmm. That's really great advice, especially the fact that you don't have to go immediately after your undergrad. I think a lot of people I know are on the same boat right now, that they feel pressure, like there's a timeline that they have to meet. They have to be I don't know, taking it in the summer of their third year, or maybe like the fall of their fourth year, because they have to go right after their undergrad. But like you said, there's people that take a year break or 2 years, or sometimes like people in their 30s and 40s. I feel like if you really have the passion, you will do it eventually. And nothing can really kind of stop you. You might be delayed for reasons, but for you, that year off was really rewarding, and it really benefited your own self growth. And I think that's a really important lesson that we can take as well, that it's totally okay to take time off for yourself. And
Yeah, like, I think especially when you get to law school, you'll realize there is a little bit of a rat race going on where everyone's competing with each other. So don't put yourself in that mindset even before law school, because you want to make sure that you go in when you're ready. Don't feel pressure to go in and end up hating yourself for being in law school, because now not only are you spending all this money on tuition, like you're not happy when you're there. So take your time, go when you're ready. And I know a lot of people that go through the law school application process, and at some point they realize, you know what, I would rather be working elsewhere. So they end up not pursuing it. So I think go through the process if you feel like it's something important to you, but make sure that you're completely ready to accept the difficulty that is law school. So don't go in, I guess 50% or 70%. Like make sure you're at least 90% of the way in.
mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned that you went to University of Windsor for law school.
Yes.
And I'm just curious, did you apply to a bunch of different law schools? Did you notice any difference in like what they needed for the application process?
So I'm definitely that person that was very nervous, given that I said my first year grades were bad, my second year grades were bad. Even though my LSAT was decent, it was not like I scored like a 170. If I scored like a 170, I'd been very happy, but I think I scored like 165 or something like that. So I wasn't like a shoo-in by any means. So I was like, okay, I'm going to apply everywhere. I'm going to apply anywhere in Canada that I can. I applied to Saskatchewan, I applied to New Brunswick. I applied to about 13, 14 different schools all the way across Canada. And one thing I only realized after applying is a lot of these other schools, they care about people in their region first, and they don't accept people outside of that region. There's only a small amount of people that accept outside the regions. For example, like if you're in Saskatchewan, you have one law school, they give priority to Saskatchewan students. They're not going to give priority to Ontario students. So even though I may have met the average law student entry requirements for Saskatchewan, they're not going to consider me when they're looking at people in their own province that they can bring to law school, who will stay there and increase the lawyer wealth in that province, right? So I got rejected from like Lakehead and Saskatchewan and New Brunswick, and then I ended up getting into Windsor. So it was like, it was sort of surprising to me, but I didn't know that at the time. And that's one tip that I always share with law students that are applying, that, hey, like make sure you realize that if you're from Ontario, it's going to be easier to get into Ontario because you're local compared to like applying abroad, and then you might not get in. You have to really cater your application to try and get in. So I did get into like Calgary and Thompson Rivers, but I made sure I sort of catered my application to those universities. When I was coming into law school, Thompson Rivers was new. And I talked about how, I'd be interested in growing with them and learning and trying to sort of cater my own law school education with them. So things like that, where I knew what the law school is offering. So I think that helped me get in. So I'm not saying it's impossible for you to be an Ontario student and get elsewhere. I have friends that came to Windsor, they're from Calgary, Alberta, all over the place. I'm just saying, just keep in mind that when you're from Ontario, you have a good chance to get in Ontario because you're local, right?
Yeah, so honestly, I was not aware of that either. I'm sure some people watching right now were not aware. So thank you for letting us know. But it does make sense that they would kind of prioritize the people living in their own regions, especially like Saskatchewan, if there's only one law school there. That does make more sense. And now I just want to kind of bring it back to before your undergrad. You mentioned that you knew you wanted to go into law when you were in grade 12, I believe. Is there something that happened in grade 12? Was there like a teacher in grade 12, something that kind of was the turning point, or was it just something you always knew as a kid?
So I obviously had the typical Brown influence, my
Mhm.
parents. were hoping for a doctor since I was born, so they were pushing me that direction. I ended up taking every single science course in grade 11. I took grade 11 chem, bio, physics. I fast tracked through math because I was going to try to take calculus in summer school. I was doing everything that I needed to where it was going to be doctor or engineer. But I ended up having a teacher in grade 10 history that I liked who was teaching grade 11 law. So I took it. I enjoyed grade 11 law. And then then I took grade 12 law because it was supposed to be one of my courses to boost my average. And for me, grade 12 was it was another one of these years that was like a personal growth year for me where I took all these science courses and then I was getting grade 12 bio and I just hated it. I just didn't like science. It wasn't for me. And kudos to everyone that loves science because I have so much respect for you, but I couldn't wrap my head around it. I just didn't like it. And even though I could have pushed myself and probably done better in it, I just didn't want to. And for me, that combined with, I also had a few friends that got in trouble in grade 12 in high school, and then they, reached out to lawyers that helped them, and they were on the straight and narrow after that. And then for me, the final thing was, I'm Tamil, so we're from the country of Sri Lanka, but there's obviously, if any of you guys were looking into social justice issues, you will see that there's a huge issue between the Tamil community and Sri Lanka and how they're being treated there. And specifically, when I was applying to university, it was 2009. And this is when, if you look into the history books, that's when the genocide of the Tamil community happened in Sri Lanka. And when all of that was going on, there was I saw some notable lawyers in the community stepping up and speaking on their behalf. And I was like, you know what, I really just want to help people in some way. And I knew that I wanted to do either international crime or criminal defense at that time. And I'm like, I just want to go into becoming a lawyer. And that was my big moment where I'm like, you know what, I'm done with everything else. I know I want to go into law, but I didn't do the research to figure out what I needed to get there to become a lawyer. And that's why I think I struggled through parts of undergrad and all that, because I was not focused on the long-term picture. I was like, you know what, let me get through this term of school. I wasn't thinking about, oh, how can I improve myself to make sure that I get into any law school I want? And that was where I made a big issue. But the decision to become a lawyer was made in grade 12 when I was seeing all these things going on. And I'm like, you know what, I know I want to impact people in some way and try to use my voice for that reason, whether it be one individual or a whole ethnic group, right? So I sort of made a decision in grade 12.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think like what it seems like the biggest thing, despite the fact that you said that your first and second year didn't go quite the way that you wanted them to go, I think what really kept you going is that passion, is the fact that you wanted to be a lawyer was for the right reasons. It wasn't for, or maybe it was, I'm not sure, but it wasn't for like the money or what a lot of people usually say, oh, because it's a really good job or it's a successful career. Even if it was a little bit, I think what's really inspirational is the fact that you had the passion for the right reasons and it was for social justice. And this goes to everyone listening as well. It's really important to make sure that you go into a career that you actually care about. Otherwise, you're going to hate it, or you're going to hate law school itself. I did not know about the Tamil genocide at all. So thank you so much for telling me, and I will definitely go into that and look into more about what that was about. I know some people in our exec board are also Tamil, and I hope that hearing from you, I hope that it really inspires, especially brown people or people of color, that being in a position of being a lawyer, you can do a lot. You can advocate a lot for your own community as well. And that's really, really important to do that and kind of utilize your career to make sure that you're speaking for those that maybe don't have a voice, or raising awareness, people who don't really know about what's happening.
Yeah, something cool really happened today where so the provincial government actually passed a Tamil genocide education month platform. So I think they're going to be teaching about what happened, because I think it's important when, especially if you're, you know, like you have colleagues, you have people that went through that and their parents are going through that, at least you understand where they're coming from. So I'm happy that they passed that. And I think there's gonna be more discussions about it. And I'll try to post through, because I know May is a very tough month for us, because that's when the genocide was at its peak in 2009. So I'll definitely try to inform people through my page and use my platform, because I think it's important that we at least understand and acknowledge what happened during that time.
I'm glad that they're introducing that, you know, as part of like teaching. So is that going to happen in schools as part of like their curriculum? Like they will start teaching this in schools, or?
That's my understanding. I haven't looked into the bill, but I know today was like the third reading of it, so it got passed. So that means we should be hearing more about how it's going to be, you know, impact, you know, all of us. But I think it's pretty cool that at least it got passed for Ontario, and I think that's a big step. So at least, like, I think whatever happens back home is obviously not in our control, but whatever happens here, at least we can educate people and try to advocate, right? I think that's all we can do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a huge step, and I'm really happy to know that, you know, like I said, I was not aware, and I'm glad that now kids in school, if it's going to be part of the curriculum, are going to be aware of what's happening. You know, we hear about so many genocides in history, but the fact that I wasn't taught about this, and I was in school in 2009 when this stuff was happening, and after that, right? So the fact that I was not aware or not taught, you know, during school, I'm glad to see that this is going to change now, and I hope that, you know, the bill is implemented properly. And I also want to look into see kind of how this impacts like all of us as well. And thank you for saying that you're going to be using your platform. I know a lot of us already follow you, but if anyone does want to follow him on Instagram, we do have him tagged on all of our session posts advertising this session. And you can also, if one of the execs want to put it in the chat, you guys can go ahead and follow over there as well.
Thank you. And of course, like, I think it's important that we slowly, like, there's a lot of atrocities across the world. Like, I know there's stuff happening in Tigray right now. There's like all kinds of things that are going on. And I think it's important for us to at least be cognizant of things, especially when we have colleagues that may be having trauma and sufferings that go through it. So I'm happy that discussions like that are happening. I think there's the positive of social media is, of course, like, you know, we're hearing about these things that are happening across the world, and it's good for us to note things. But going back to, I guess, my own personal law journey, I realize that international crime is very difficult. It's a difficult area because it carries a lot of emotions when you're dealing with it. And it's also very, very slow. Like, you're not going to see international justice for decades, right? I think that's the part that really turned me off from it. It's a slow grind. Like criminal defense, there's no case that really goes beyond 3 or 4 years. I think most things are done within 3 or 4 years. This is, we're talking about decades and decades of work. So I think that was, I don't know if I have the emotional baggage to like being carrying on a whole community's plight for that long. So I have so much respect for international criminal lawyers and people that are documenting these things and fighting on the grounds, because kudos to them for being patient and having to deal with it for decades, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. And I mean, even what you do as a criminal defense lawyer, like you're still changing people's lives, you know, you're changing the lives of entire families and entire communities, I'm sure. And the impact that you have, it's still a very big impact. And of course, like you can speak more to that in terms of your experiences within your career now, and kind of the clients that you deal with and the successes that you've had so far.
Oh yes, I feel like I might have went off some of the questions there, but so yeah, so I am in criminal defense right now. I've been practicing it primarily since I was articling. When I was articling, I did a little bit of other like small claims and whatnot, but for the most part, it's been criminal defense. I think, sorry, do you want me to go by the order of the questions, or do you want me to just go off whatever you?
I'm looking at the list as well. I've been changing the order just because I kind of want to go with the flow of the conversation. But
Okay.
if you want to go with the order, like that's totally okay as well.
Yeah, because so we had touched upon this earlier too. I think the money thing is, of course, not the number one motive. If it is, I think criminal defense is not for you, because a corporate lawyer, a PI lawyer is going to make way more than a criminal lawyer if they're good at what they do, right? Because a PI lawyer, if they get $1 million settlement, they get 33% of that. That's like $300,000, right? So we got $1 million settlement, you're sort of good for the year, right? So for us to make $300,000, it's a lot more work. So I don't think criminal defense is one you choose because of the money. That being said, I think if you're good at it, of course you can make money. I think any area of law, if you're good at what you do, you're going to make money. So don't be discouraged about that. But that being said, criminal defense, I think you really have to be an advocate for people. I think specifically a lot of individuals that don't have a strong voice. I think it's important that you understand that, and you're basically going up against a system, right? And we've seen in the last year a lot of people protesting the system, and I think the system clearly has a lot of issues, right? And it's, you know, Canada is supposed to have one of the better systems, but even the Canadian government, the Canadian police force, RCMP, there's still a lot of issues that are coming to light. And I think it's important as criminal defense lawyers to know that we have, I think, an esteemed position because we're advocating for the people that can't advocate for themselves. So I think that alone, I take, you know, for me, it's very important that people realize that. And I think a lot of my colleagues and I share that passion, which is what allows us to continue doing the work. I know that obviously not every case is the same. There's some cases that you're gonna, you know, not sleep over because they're gonna be dragging you down because of the emotionalness. I think anytime for me personally, when a client's liberty is at stake, which means they're, you know, they might face jail time, those ones always eat at me the most. I don't like seeing people go to jail. I don't like seeing people be in jail. So for me, those ones eat at me the most. With respect to case wise, I know one of the questions that we had, I guess, pre-discussed, or you had emailed me, was about what kind of cases I deal with. Currently, I deal with everything. So any type of crime. I primarily get a lot of domestics and drinking and drivings, those kind of matters. But I've dealt with almost all types of crimes except for murder. I think I'm still a little young to take one of the murders on. If I ever did have a murder come to the door, I would definitely have at least a couple senior counsel work with me, because I wouldn't be content to do one at this time in my career. But that being said, everything else I have done, I know so defending everything is different. Like every crime has their own, and some criminal defense lawyers specialize for a reason, because you can become really good at one area of law. So even within criminal defense, there's some that specifically do fraud, for example, because fraud is very complex. You're dealing with a lot of paperwork and whatnot. And some people specifically do drinking and driving, also a very complex area of law. But I'm very curious and interested in learning about it all. So I do it all. And thankfully I have a good mentorship in place that helps me not be afraid to take things on, because I know they have my back, and I'll always review things with them. And you know, it makes it easier to go to battle when you know you have backup, right? So I think given all of that, I think I have a network in place to take on any kind of case.
And just to ask, is there any specific case, obviously you don't have to give us details, but is there any specific case throughout your career so far that really stood out to you? And if you could just give us one case that you feel like you're going to think about for the rest of your life. I'm sure you'll remember all of them, but this one really, really impacted you differently.
So this one I actually posted about on my Instagram, and for me, it was one of the more important ones that'll always stand up in my mind. Going into, I went through law school, I started articling, and of course, like when you're articling is when you get like a real hands-on experience of what you're doing and what the field looks like. And when I was a very junior lawyer, I think I was a few months in, I had to write a charter application. For those of you who may not know or may not be, I guess, well-versed, the Charter of Rights is, of course, like the most important document. Like it's a constitutional law. You know, it has to be upheld at every level. And I was working with my articling principal, and he had entrusted me to work on this charter application and do a good portion of it, because what had happened was he had a client that was, you know, he was being arrested for drinking and driving. The cops pull him over, and there's nobody in the driver's seat. So they go to the back, and they see him there, and they said, "Oh, I saw you drinking," whatever. And then he decides, for some reason, to run. Now, this is the reason I can talk about this, because it's in the Toronto Star. So in the Toronto Star, you can look it up, and you can see how there's a video where you see the officer chasing our client. Our client stops running, turns around, looks at the officer. When the officer's coming running in, she already has her gun drawn and pointed at him. He turns away, and when he turns away, she decides to fire a shot. And I was like, wait a second, what? This is like, did she really shoot at someone while he was turned around? And he didn't like pose any sort of threat really, because there's no like weapon in hand or gun out or anything like that. He was turned around and walking away. And then I looked at her notes and I realized her notes were completely different from what actually happened, right? Her notes were saying that he had lunged at her, and that's when she pulled out a gun, and then she fired a warning shot while he was like looking at her in the air or something like that. And I was like, what? How are you misremembering what happened? Or is it just that like, maybe, like it's possible, maybe she was like so frightened and what happened in that time frame where she like misremembered and just wrote things wrong. But in my opinion, I was like, oh shit, so officers do lie, right? Like officers do make mistakes, right? And at that point, like that was like the first time I really had that experience. And since then, I'm like, you know what, every time I read an officer's notes, I'm like, okay, I don't believe this until I see some other proof. And if my client is saying that this is how it happened, then I'm going to believe my client, because once again, like we're the only one fighting for them. So if my client's saying, oh, the officer did this, I'm going to believe my client, because I don't believe what the officers are writing down. And unfortunately, only Toronto Police and York Region Police in the GTA have in-car cameras right now. So if you're in like Durham, an officer does something, it's not being recorded on camera, right? If you're in Peel, it's not being recorded on camera. So I'm going to trust my client's word, because end of the day, the officers do lie, right? So I think that was like the first really big case that I was working on, and it was also very important in shaping my perspective for, I think, the rest of my career. So I'll never forget that case.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because we always, I mean, growing up, you always see officers as, you know, super trustworthy, and I'm sure like a lot of them still are, but you would think that they would kind of uphold the law, and, you know, part of that is being honest. And I'm glad that in that case, there was video evidence of what actually happened. And it's nice that you said that, you know, you trust your client, and I'm assuming is that something that, you know, like for criminal lawyers especially, like you need to make sure that you trust your client completely and they completely trust you as well, in order for you to kind of move forward.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's an important relationship, whether that relationship is a few months or a few years. I think it's important that it's based on trust. I always tell my clients, like, at any point, if you don't trust me, I don't want to, I can't defend you, right? You have to find a different lawyer, because I think it's something based on trust. If you don't trust your own lawyer to have your best interests, then personally, I feel like that's not a good bond, right? I don't think I would want to go to war with someone that doesn't trust me, right? So I think I've tried to establish trust from early on, like from our first, like the start of the relationship, and then we try to move forward. And of course, like it's like a lawyer-client bond is like every relationship. There's going to be ups and downs. Sometimes we run into roadblocks. Sometimes we run into arguments. But I think as long as there's just like open avenues of communication and that trust in place, I've always, like win or lose at the end of trial, at the end of whatever. I've always been able to manage a good relationship with my clients, because they at least know that, hey, like we fought, like we didn't give up here, right? So I think that's important to me.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as that happens, as long as I hope going forward, all of my clients have that kind of trust where whatever happens, and they still think that I did a good job for them. I think that's my goal, at least.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And you know, you did also express kind of things that you like most about criminal law and the field in general, and especially right now, the fact that you're getting to experience like all different kinds of cases. But if you had to say like one thing that you dislike about being a criminal defense lawyer, what would you say that would be?
So I think there are definitely things that you could dislike. Of course, one thing that comes first is the system, right? The system, sometimes I feel, I don't know if I've just been biased now because I've been on the defense side for 4 years now, and I just see things in that view, but sometimes I'll hear a judgment and I'm like, what? How? Like, how are you coming to this decision when it's clear to me that this shouldn't be the decision? So I think I dislike that things are, and end of the day, judges are people too. As much as they're supposed to be unbiased, there's definitely a difference between certain judges, and certain judges will see things certain ways and certain judges won't. So I think that is, I dislike how inconsistent the system is in that way. Like for me, I just want a fair shot, and I just want my client to have a reasonable shot. And it sort of sucks that a judge that may have, you know, acquitted him on something is not the one that's hearing the trial, and somebody else is, you know? So I think that part sort of irritates me. And then from a practical standpoint, I think what I dislike the most is obviously collecting money is hard. I think clients will always try not to pay you. I've had to, like my first year of practice, it was very difficult for me to figure out a good balance in how to collect money, and how, like I sort of felt like I was the one that was being rude. Like, hey, like, can you pay me? Like, can you like give me some money? And
Yeah.
I was like, and then now I'm at the point where I'm like, hey, if you can pay your bills, your credit and your collections, I don't care about that. Like that, they won't be affected. But your livelihood, your liberty, like that's the most important. Like I should be the first bill you pay. So if you're surviving out there and paying bills, then you should definitely be able to pay me. And I think I'm reasonable with setting up payment plans. I take legal aid, things like that. So I think, obviously it's unfortunate that you're in a circumstance where you have to pay lawyer fees, but I think I'm able to at least tell them why and make them understand why. And I think I'm also strict enough where I'm like, I guess after a point, thankfully I'm at a point where I'm not desperate enough where like I'll take bullshit, so I can sort of tell them like, hey, like end of the day, if you're not going to pay me, I'm not going to show up to court. So then you can decide what you want to do, right? So I think getting to that point was hard because initially I was like, oh, I'll take any $100 I can, right? So I'll do whatever the client says. But I think knowing your value and knowing your worth and sort of pricing yourself accordingly and all of that I disliked because end of the day, you're still have to ask somebody for money, and you still have to like, this person's paying a sum and they're not going to be able to afford other things in life, and you think about all of that. But end of the day, obviously you have to earn a living too, right? So I think that whole area, if I could avoid that, if someone could do that for me, I'll be very happy.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine it's a very awkward conversation to have, especially when you're just starting out as a lawyer. And I guess maybe you don't know your value, or you're still learning how to kind of deal with clients. Because, I mean, to have to say like, hey, can you pay me? Or you haven't paid me yet? Or, I can't really help you until you pay me. I see why you would think that you're coming across as rude, but obviously you're doing your job in the same way you would pay anyone for any service. Like this is the same thing. And I'm glad that now you're more comfortable, and I guess it comes with time and with more experience. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And kind of just staying on that same track, if you could say like, what is one common misconception about lawyers in general? You could do either criminal defense lawyers or lawyers in general, that you hear about the most, that you're kind of like sick of hearing.
So I think the most misconceived thing is like everyone assumes lawyers are like what they see on TV. I think, obviously that's TV for a reason, and people just assume that lawyers want to argue all the time, and like we're like constantly trying to pick fights or something. And I'm like, no, like for me, like I argue enough at work. I don't want to argue on my personal time as well, so I don't want to really be arguing for fun, right? I'm not one of those people that get into like debates on my comments or comment sections on like random areas, because I'm like, like I don't care about changing your mind, right? My job to change the judge's mind. I don't care about changing your mind. So I think people think that all lawyers try to like argue all the time, or like, I saw someone comment about suits, like, yeah, people talk about Harvey Specter all the time or ask me about suits and if it's real, and I'm like, I don't think so. Like it's very dramatized, right? I don't think corporate law is like that. And then I think specifically to criminal defense lawyers, for some reason, a lot of people can't wrap their heads around that this is a job, and it's an important job for justice. I think people assume you're a criminal defense lawyer, you support crime, which, end of the day, of course, like, people that commit crime coming to me, you know, feeds my living, and that's important. Of course, like I'm not saying that, you know, I want to go without any clients ever. But that being said, like I don't support crime. I think that's very clear. That I try to make that clear. Like I don't support any crime. I think drinking and driving is horrible. I've seen a lot of people get in accidents. I've seen what it can do, and people assume that, hey, just because I defend a lot of drinking and driving people, I'm supporting drinking and driving. I'm like, no, that's not it. It's just, you know what, this person is now at the mercy of the system, and I just want to make sure that they get out of it the best way possible and get their justice. Because at the end of the day, they shouldn't get a crazy punishment just because they don't have a lawyer or proper legal representation. I don't know what's going on with my.
Okay,
Sorry.
no problem. So yeah, you're answering a lot of like the other questions within your answer, so thank you for that. And I do remember, like, you know, in when I took grade 12 law and hearing about criminal law as well, and how like, oh, but you were kind of supporting crimes, or you help criminals, like what kind of person are you, and how you have no morals if you're a criminal defense lawyer because you're helping criminals. But there's so much more, I'm sure, like for example.
So not to cut you off, but I know when I was in law school, we had one of the biggest, best primetime criminal defense lawyers, Marie Hanine, come to our office, come to our law school and speak, and the whole area was full, and she was speaking, and she's the one who defended Gian Gomeshi when he had his sexual assault charges. And she said one of the biggest criticisms she received was, she's like, they were like, well, as a woman, how could you defend him, right? And it's like, wait a second, so are you saying that a woman can't do this job? Like, it doesn't make sense. Like, she's one of the best lawyers in the city, and she's, you know, a great criminal defense lawyer, and she's just doing her job, right? She's defending someone the best she can. And the fact that, you know, she was successful, people thought that she was anti-feminist or something like that. I'm like, it's not that, right? She's doing her job, right? I think people have to realize, and it's a job, and ultimately, it's not our side to prove that this person's guilty. It's the Crown side. The judge has to find guilt. It's we just have to make sure that a defense is before the court, right?
Okay, thank you for clearing that up as well. So I just want to do like one last question, and then I kind of want to open up the floor to if any of you have any questions. So I know that you talked about kind of what advice you would give to your younger self, like maybe when you were in undergrad, about you know, like your first and second year of university. But now just to open it up to all of us, like what advice would you give to like the future generation of aspiring like lawyers or legal professionals? So maybe things that you wish someone told you.
I think we sort of touched on this before we went live. I think trying to find your voice is very key. And when I say that, I mean everywhere, in the sense that don't be shy to reach out to professors, as I was saying earlier. Don't be shy to reach out to lawyers and talk to them. Don't be shy to be yourself. And I think a lot of, especially minorities, we feel like, hey, we don't know if we fit in this system, and we have imposter syndrome and all of that. So I think for me, you know, 4 years in, I'm still having that battle where sometimes I feel like, oh shit, like, I don't know if I fit here or fit in this room. And I'm constantly reminding myself, like, hey, like, we can take up space, and it's important that we recognize our value, and whatever you bring to the legal system is yours and uniquely yours, and you can do whatever you want with it. I think approaching the legal system as a whole with that mindset and knowing your own value, I think can take you anywhere you want, because you'll succeed once you realize your own value.
Okay, thank you so much. And that's all the questions that I have. I know that's a lot of questions, and thank you so much for answering them. And if any of you want to go ahead and ask something in the chat, or if you want to turn your mic on, if you could just use the raise hand function, and then I can unmute you from my end. Okay, I do see a raised hand. Christiane, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Aisha. Hi, my name's Christiane. First of all, thank you so much for this presentation. It was super insightful. I wanted to be a lawyer since I was like in grade 4. I wrote like a very persuasive essay on why I want a dog, and my teacher read it and she's like, yeah, you should really like think of becoming a lawyer. And I didn't even know what a lawyer meant like when I was that young, but I did more research and everything. And kind of like you, I had an amazing grade 12 law teacher who really encouraged me to also go into law. So yeah, no, this presentation definitely furthered that goal. So my question is, you say like you deal with drunk driving and like domestic abuse and whatnot. And obviously it's so important to defend the little guy, especially against this like horrible system. There are a lot of holes in the judicial system, as we know. But is there any case that you got, and obviously you don't have to go into specifics, that you looked at the notes and whatnot, and you're just like, I cannot defend this. Like this is a crime. There should be some sort of retribution. Like, was there any cases like that?
So when I first started, I thought there would be. I thought where I would draw the line was anytime child porn or anything of child nature, where it's like, sexual assault against children, like sexual exploitation. I think that's where I was like, for me, it just, I thought, oh, like that would give me the creeps. Like, how can I defend someone that's allegedly done these things? I think as I get older, I realize like those are the individuals that, absolutely no one believes, right? Like there's no one believing that this person didn't do it. And if that's the case, then, I think it's a challenge, right? I think it's a challenge morally for you to actually like step up and defend them. But B, I think it's important to realize that, hey, what if he is telling the truth, right? Or what if she is telling the truth, right? What if that possibility exists? Is, as a lawyer, it's your job to make sure that you're not joining with everyone else and saying that this person isn't telling the truth. I did work on a child porn case once, and it was sort of interesting. I didn't get a chance to like see it all the way through, but it was interesting in the sense that I did the bail and all that. So like I did some of it, and it was just interesting to just see my mindset change after a few years, where I'm like, hey, like this person, I didn't see them as a criminal. I sort of saw them as someone that needed help, right? I think there's someone that clearly at some point in their life, weren't socialized or felt like this was appropriate, and it wasn't. And it was, how can we use a system to make sure that this person rehabilitates to the point where they don't see or they don't find attraction in that kind of behavior anymore, right? That's the kind of thought process that was going through my head, where I think everyone else that maybe saw this person or somebody being charged with child porn and think, oh, how disgusting, this guy must be the worst, For me, after 3-4 years in the system and seeing, I'm like, you know what? I saw that person as somebody that needed help, and I was willing to help them and hope that the system can find that person. I think there's two sides to justice, right? Obviously, you want the victims of it to have justice, but you also want this person to like rehabilitate and hopefully never have to do that again, right? I think that's, so being able to see both sides has made it where now I think I'm okay with defending anybody, as long as it makes sense for me.
Thank you. Yeah, that answered my question.
Okay, thank you for your question, Christiane. If there's anyone else that wants to raise their hand, or you can also say something in the chat if you don't feel comfortable unmuting. And we're going to be wrapping up in around 7-ish minutes, because we did say that it would be 6 to 7. Yeah, so feel free to ask any questions that you guys may have. Do you see more raised hands? Nada, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you, Aisha. So thank you so much for this presentation. And I did have another question. So what does the workload of like a typical week look like? Like, I know that it differs based on like whether if you have cases and stuff, but like, what would you say the average workload of a week would look like in terms of hours and stuff like that?
So that's a good question. Of course, it depends on what area of law. I think it depends on what size of firm. Like, I think it depends on a lot of things. I can say that a lot of people that are my colleagues that are 3-year calls that are working as an associate, which means, working for somebody else. They're working 6 days a week at least. They work 6 days a week, and I would say at least 10 hours a day, so minimum. So I think they're looking at 60 hours. They probably get 2 weeks off, maybe 3 weeks off for the year. But other than that, they're working full time. So I think that's the price you pay to be an associate. I personally, that was one of the reasons why I wanted to open my own firm. I wanted to control my time. For me, I really value my own time. And I think it's important for me to if I want to work 100-hour week, I will. And if I want to work 0, I will, right? So I think I specifically plan my weeks where there's certain months of the year where I know I'm gonna be super busy. And then there's times where I'll take time off and make sure that I try to have some sort of work-life balance. I know it's been a little hard during the pandemic, but I've been trying my best to make sure that I don't burn out and take time off. So I'll say, like last month, I was really busy. I think I was working at least 70 hours a week. And then this month, the last 2 weeks, have been a little bit easier, I would say. So I'm probably down to like 40 hours the last 2 weeks. And I think I plan on giving myself some time off in July so I can sort of enjoy myself.
Thank you. I think I just wanted to know that because I know that a lot of students, like, say they want to go into law school and like their ambition is to become a lawyer, but a lot of the times we aren't aware of how hard lawyers actually work and how much they actually work. And so 70 hours a week is definitely insane. It's a lot of work for sure.
And to be fair, like there are positions like in-house counsel where you work for a company. There are positions in the government. For example, like you can work at a courthouse from like 8 to 5, things like that, where it is a little bit more standard procedure. But that being said, of course, like it's all up to what you want to do. And it goes back to him saying, like, if you really enjoy it, then it doesn't seem like, for me, like I personally, this may be nerdy of me, but instead of binging a TV show, I sort of find it more interesting going to work because I'm like, hey, like when I binge a TV show, I don't feel as great. And when I go to work, A, I'm making money, and B, I'm doing some interesting work. So I'm never really not motivated to go in and get things done.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. So we'll take another one. Harry, if you want to unmute yourself.
Hi, yeah. So first of all, thank you for being here. Very empowering story, and I love like your knack for advocacy. So my question is more so related to before getting to law school. So you said that grade 12 was kind of your turning point, that kind of put you on the path of law. So at any point did your kind of like knack for advocacy or your ambition to get into law like kind of waver, maybe due to some things like how you may have been a little behind in terms of doing the research to get to law, or maybe the stresses of school were just getting to you and you felt like maybe this wasn't for you, and kind of how did you deal with that if that was the case?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I don't mean to rush through. I just want to see if we can get all the questions in before 7. I definitely felt that. I think I felt it most importantly in first year when my 1B, so my first year, second term, I had a 55% average. So I thought I was like, I screwed myself. I thought I was going to be done. And then I was really in my feels for a bit. And second year, I still didn't recover properly. And then I was sort of beating myself up when I realized, hey, wait a second, I still have 2 whole fucking years. Like I can get this shit together, you know? So I think that was when I was really down on myself. I was still doubting myself going into the application process with LSAT and all that. And that's why I applied everywhere I did, because I was like, I'm not sure if I'm going to get in. So Windsor was actually the first school to accept me. And I was like, oh shit, like maybe I am worthy. Maybe I do deserve to be there. So I think when Windsor accepted me, I think that was when I sort of got, rewarded for all that hard work. But I was pretty much down on myself for at least 2-3 years where thankfully I had some friends that supported me that said, you know what, you can do it if you want to. And then I just pushed myself, but I was very much down on myself because of my grades.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure if you have to leave because I can see there's more questions.
Yeah, we'll take those 2 more questions. I feel like their hands been up for a while.
Yeah, I feel bad. So we'll just take those 2 more and then we'll kind of wrap the session up. So if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, or I can unmute you.
Hi, thank you so much for hosting this. I was actually very excited to attend because I've been following you and shadowing lawyers for a long time on Instagram. My question is, like, how do you, I guess it kind of relates to the previous question. How do you balance, I know like lawyers are stereotypically seen as people who have big voices and who should stand strong all the time, but I'm sure lawyers also feel low self-esteem or get down at points in their life or during their career or even in law school. And how do you balance that? Like at times when you self-doubt or at times when you feel like you can't make it, how do you keep pushing it through?
So I was pretty bad at this. So I don't think I'm the best person to ask. I was bad at this in undergrad. I was bad at this in law school, where I got down myself a lot, and I sort of just went into my own hole, and I didn't really tell people about it. And I was like, you know what, I'm not sure what's going on, but I don't feel great. Now, as I, became a lawyer and, more cognizant about mental health, I also don't want to be one of those lawyers that burn out or, end up abusing substances or anything like that. So I think that is important to me. So nowadays, the way I make sure I'm not down on myself is, if I'm ever going through a tough case or tough time, I think it's very important to have mentors that have been there. I have a few amazing mentors that are helping me through this day in, day out. I think I'm in touch with them at least once a week, where they're helping me. And I know sometimes, I'll have a tough call or like we'll end up losing a case that I felt like we should have won. And then they'll tell me, and they'll put it in perspective. I remember one lawyer was like, you realize criminal defense, like you're supposed to lose, right? Like you're not supposed to win. Like the cops are supposed to get it right? They're supposed to get this right and do this right all the time, where the fact that you lose isn't a horrible thing as long as you fought the right fight and you put all your defense out there, then that's all you can ask for, right? So I think having a mentorship and support system in place is very important. And also realizing that, hey, like as we talked about at the start of the session, you don't have a timeline. Don't try to finish things because other people tell you to finish things. Don't finish things because your parents say, hey, like you're getting older now, like make sure you finish your career, I think make sure you focus on yourself and do things on your own timelines. And they don't be afraid to ask for a break or space or whatever you need to make sure that you go through the process and are as healthy as possible, because I think you need to be mentally healthy and in a good place to continually do good work for your clients.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for your question. And we'll just take the last one. Maham, if you want to unmute yourself.
Hi, Sudhit. Thank you so much for being here. I'm certainly learning a lot. Sal from Breaking Bad was not a good representation for criminal lawyers out there, but I'll take it. My question was more related to COVID or the pandemic. I wanted to know how that has impacted criminal lawyers in Ontario. Have there been an increase in criminal cases? Has there been a decrease? And just how lawyers are adapting to it, essentially.
That's a very good question. I don't think there's exactly a short answer, but I can give you as short as possible. I think there's been a lot of pros and cons. I think COVID definitely pushed the legal world into adapting their old ways. Like, we're not like, we used to have like, things that are written and have to submit things in person and like wait in lines in Brampton Courthouse for like 2.5 hours to get things done. And now it's like all online, it's virtual, we're moving things along. People are finally like adapting to the new world. For criminal defense, we have to do something called set date court, which is like where you're going around and doing remands for clients. There's times where I had to like drive all the way to Milton for like a 2-minute remand, and I'm waiting in line for 2 hours. It's such a waste of resources. So I think on that level, we've really adapted, where now like things are going by a lot faster. I think the fact that recently I had 2 clients arrested on the same day. And typically I would not have been able to get them both out because I would have not been able to be at both courthouses. But now I'm able to do like, okay, let's do this bail in the morning in Scarborough, bail in the morning in Barrie, got them both out. And I was like, oh shit, like I can do more work at the same time because I'm not wasting time driving around or doing things that are inefficient. So on that level, the pandemic has been very key in pushing things forward. Obviously, as a younger lawyer, it sort of sucks because the bigger lawyers can really spend their money on, because now for them, same thing, they're more efficient. So they have a bunch of support workers in place. They can put a lot of money in ad agencies and advertising, or they can bring in a lot of clients because now they have this support system in place to like go anywhere in Ontario, no problem. For me, I got to really consider things a little bit. Like obviously, one of the reasons I use Instagram and I'm trying to use TikTok because it's like free ways to generate more business. I think I'm trying to develop some more online techniques so I can sort of do that during the pandemic. But nevertheless, like obviously, I can't match some of the bigger firms with their marketing budget. So I think on that level, I'm losing out because one of the ways I did get clients before is I used to be able to walk into court, and thankfully, like I was, I guess, I don't know if the right word, charming, but like good enough to like impress the client while in court, where they're like, hey, like, can I get your number? Can I come see you? Can you help me with this? And hire me from in court. So I used to get like at least, I would say at least 10, 15 clients a year by just walking into court. So I don't have that anymore. So I think now I have to sort of adapt to like everything online. I tell all my friends, it's almost like dating nowadays, right? Like everything's online. So you have to also do all your marketing online. So I don't have the luxury of going in person anymore. So I think those are like some of the ups and downs of COVID and all of that. I did have a trial where it was going to begin, and then my client tested positive for COVID. I ended up having 2 weeks set aside for this client, and now we had to adjourn it and set it aside for another 2 weeks. So a whole month of my year has been spent on this one client because of COVID. So there's things like that that are, of course, bringing the negatives of COVID, of course, and I'm hoping that we're all out of this sooner than later. But I'm very happy that it put the push to the legal system, and not only in criminal, but every single area of the legal system has been pushed to the point where, hey, we can do things more efficiently because of technology. Look at us now, right? So I think that's very important.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up the session. Thank you so much for coming today and for speaking to all of us about your experiences. Thank you to everyone who asked questions, and for those of you that are watching the recording, thank you for taking time out of your day to go ahead and watch this. And we're really, really excited and kind of honored that you came on today. And again, his Instagram is in the chat. And so if you guys want to follow, I think it's really interesting to kind of see how you're marketing yourself online as well. Like during the pandemic, he makes TikToks too, so that's really cool. And yeah, so go ahead. Yeah, there we go. So go ahead and follow. And I'm sure if you guys have some really, really burning questions that maybe could not be answered here, that have a longer answer. I know you're a really busy guy, but maybe you guys can go ahead and email.
Yeah, and I was going to say, like, that's why I put my email in there. I think I saw like a hand up that didn't ask a question. Of course, feel free to reach out. I think it's important that, I always tell people the story every time I have a talk where like I went into law school not knowing any lawyer except for one. So I think it's important that, at least you can say like, hey, I met one lawyer. So I think it's sort of cool to reach out to law students, and you guys will all definitely get there. So feel free to reach out at any time, and thank you guys for having me.
All right, thank you so much. And yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and end the recording.